Imagine being told that the parts of you that cause the most pain, your anxiety, your addictions, your inner critic, even your darkest impulses, are not your enemies. Imagine discovering that none of them are broken, evil, or pathological. In No Bad Parts, Richard Schwartz makes a radical claim. Every part of you is trying to help, even when it hurts you. Healing doesn't come from fixing yourself. It comes from listening. This book offers a new way to understand the human mind, trauma, and inner conflict. It replaces shame with curiosity, self-control with compassion, and inner warfare with leadership. What follows is a complete, chapter-by-chapter summary of No Bad Parts, following the book exactly as written, designed for spoken narration. Alanis Morissette opens the book by describing how internal family systems, or IFS, entered her life during a period of deep vulnerability. She explains how this approach helped her discover a stable, compassionate inner presence she calls the self. Through IFS, she learned to relate to her anger, fear, creativity, and pain not as flaws but as messengers. The foreword emphasizes that every part, no matter how frightening, contains wisdom, and that learning to listen inwardly can transform not only our inner lives, but how we relate to the world. Schwartz begins with people whose lives appear successful until a crisis shatters them. A heart attack, a divorce, a loss. These moments expose how much of life is driven by striving, competition, and fear. When those parts collapse, people become open to discovering something deeper inside. Schwartz introduces the idea of the self, a calm, compassionate, connected core that exists in everyone. This self is not something you create or develop. It is already there, waiting beneath protective parts. He connects this idea to broader cultural crises, arguing that societies dominated by competitive, fear-driven parts mirror the same dysfunctions individuals experience. The book proposes IFS not just as therapy, but as a life practice rooted in inherent human goodness. Part 1. Internal Family Systems. Chapter 1. We're all multiple. Most of us grow up believing that we have a single, unified mind. We assume that thoughts, emotions, impulses, and reactions all come from one central me. Richard Schwartz calls this belief the monomind model, and he argues that it is deeply misleading. According to internal family systems, the human mind is not singular, it is naturally multiple. Inside every person exists an inner community made up of different parts. These parts are like subpersonalities, each with its own perspective, emotions, memories, and roles. When you feel conflicted, when one side of you wants to take a risk and another wants to hide, that is not weakness or confusion. It is evidence of this inner multiplicity. Schwartz is careful to clarify that this does not mean everyone has dissociative identity disorder. The difference between everyday multiplicity and dissociation is not kind, but degree. People who experienced extreme trauma early in life often have parts that are more polarized and disconnected. But the basic structure, parts interacting inside, is universal. The problem is that our culture has pathologized multiplicity. Religion, philosophy, and psychology have often portrayed human impulses as sinful, primitive, or dangerous. As a result, we learn to fear certain parts of ourselves. We label them as weaknesses, flaws, or character defects. When a fearful part shows up, we try to overpower it with willpower. When a shame-filled or angry part appears, we try to suppress it or criticize ourselves into obedience. Over time, this creates an internal war. One part becomes an inner drill sergeant, shaming other parts into submission. But shaming never heals. It only forces parts into more extreme roles. Schwartz shows that parts do not act out randomly. Even the most destructive behaviors, addiction, self-harm, rage, withdrawal, are attempts by parts to protect the system. These parts often took on their roles during moments of trauma, when they believed they were saving the person's life. The radical conclusion of this chapter is simple but unsettling. There are no bad parts. There are only parts that were forced into extreme roles by painful circumstances and have never been allowed to tell their stories. The exercises in this chapter introduce the reader to meeting protectors directly, beginning the shift from fighting parts to listening to them. Chapter 2. Why Parts Blend. In IFS, the word blending describes what happens when a part takes over consciousness. When a part blends, its emotions, beliefs, and impulses feel like the whole truth. You do not notice the part, you become it. When someone is blended with fear, the world feels dangerous. When blended with shame, the self feels fundamentally flawed. When blended with anger, other people appear threatening or contemptible. In these moments, access to calm and perspective disappears. Parts blend because they believe they must. Most protective parts do not trust the self to handle life. This distrust often comes from early experiences where the person was powerless, abuse, neglect, abandonment, or overwhelming stress. In those moments, the part stepped in to manage danger. Because these parts are frozen in the past, they often react to present situations as if the original trauma is still happening. A minor criticism can feel like total rejection. A disagreement can feel like a life or death threat. Some people live almost constantly blended with certain parts. Their beliefs, I'm a fraud, no one can be trusted, I must always be productive, feel normal and unquestionable, even though they are driven by burdened parts. Schwartz emphasizes an important truth. The self is never gone. Even when parts are fully blended, the self remains underneath, temporarily obscured. Like the sun during an eclipse, it has not disappeared, only been blocked from view. Unblending allows the self to re-emerge. When that happens, people experience clarity, perspective, and compassion, not only for themselves, but for others. From self, it becomes possible to see beyond another person's defenses to the pain driving them. The chapter includes a guided practice for unblending, helping readers experience the difference between being overwhelmed by a part and relating to it. Chapter 3. This changes everything. As Schwartz worked with clients over time, he noticed something remarkable. When protective parts stepped back, people consistently entered a distinct state of being. They became calmer, more curious, more confident, and more compassionate, without trying. This state was not another part. Clients described it as their true self, their core, or simply me. Schwartz named this presence the self. The self has specific qualities, known as the 8 Cs: calm, clarity, curiosity, compassion, courage, confidence, creativity, and connection. When the self is present, healing happens naturally. One of the most important discoveries of IFS is that the self does not need to be strengthened or developed. It cannot be damaged by trauma. It is already whole. Healing is not about building the self. It is about creating enough internal safety for parts to allow the self to lead. When self-leadership is present, protectors relax. They no longer have to work so hard. Exiled parts feel seen and begin to release the burdens they carry. Internal systems reorganize without force. This chapter marks a turning point in the book. Healing is no longer about fixing broken parts. It is about restoring leadership to the self. Exercises in this chapter help readers work with inner dilemmas and approach difficult protectors from a place of curiosity rather than control. Chapter 4. More on systems. Schwartz deepens the systems perspective by showing that parts do not exist in isolation. They form relationships, alliances, and conflicts, much like members of a family. Some parts protect others by suppressing them. Some polarize against each other, creating internal stalemates. For example, one part may push relentlessly for success while another resists and sabotages out of exhaustion or fear. Traditional approaches often try to eliminate one side of these polarizations. IFS takes a different approach. Instead of choosing sides, the self listens to all parts involved. When each part feels understood, extreme positions soften. Schwartz emphasizes that healing cannot be rushed. Parts need consistent experiences of being respected and not overridden. Daily self-led practices build trust over time. This chapter includes a daily IFS meditation designed to strengthen self-leadership and maintain internal balance. Chapter 5. Mapping Our Inner Systems. In this chapter, Schwartz introduces the idea that inner systems often organize around specific traumatic experiences. He compares the psyche to a garlic bulb, made up of multiple cloves. Each clove represents a subsystem of parts connected to a particular wound or theme. Healing one subsystem can bring relief, but it does not automatically heal others. This explains why people may feel better in one area of life while still struggling in another. Mapping parts helps bring these systems into awareness. By visually representing parts and their relationships, people naturally unblend from them and gain perspective. Schwartz illustrates how mapping reveals hidden dynamics, who protects whom, which parts are exiled, and where conflicts arise. This process reduces shame and confusion by showing that symptoms are organized responses, not random failures. The chapter reinforces a key principle of IFS: curiosity creates safety. When parts are seen and acknowledged, they no longer need to act as loudly. Mapping becomes a foundational tool for ongoing self-leadership and healing. Part 2. Self-Leadership. Chapter 6. Healing and Transformation. Chapter 6 explains how real healing happens in internal family systems. Schwartz makes it clear that healing is not about controlling parts or forcing change. It follows a specific internal sequence rooted in safety and trust. At the center of healing is the self. Before any deep work can occur, protective parts must trust that the self is present and capable. Protectors, such as inner critics, numbing parts, intellectualizers, or hypervigilant managers, exist to prevent overwhelming pain. They are not obstacles to healing. They are guardians. Schwartz emphasizes that protectors must never be bypassed. If they feel ignored or threatened, they will intensify symptoms. Healing begins by approaching protectors with curiosity and respect, asking what they fear would happen if they relaxed. Only when protectors grant permission can the self connect with exiles, parts that carry pain, terror, shame, grief, or loneliness from past trauma. Exiles are often frozen in time, still believing the danger is present. Healing occurs when the self witnesses these exiles with compassion. The exile is not analyzed or corrected. It is seen, heard, and emotionally accompanied. Once fully witnessed, the exile can release the extreme emotions and beliefs it has carried, what Schwartz calls burdens. This process of unburdening is transformative. When burdens are released, parts naturally return to their original, healthy states. No effort is required to redesign them. Transformation happens organically once pain is released. The chapter includes guided exercises that walk readers through the healing path step by step, reinforcing that pacing, permission, and self-presence are essential. Chapter 7. The Self in Action. In Chapter 7, Schwartz demonstrates how self-leadership functions in real life, particularly in relationships. When people operate from blended parts, interactions escalate quickly. Defensiveness meets defensiveness, and conflict spiral. The self responds differently. It does not attack, submit, or withdraw. It listens without losing boundaries. From self-energy, it becomes possible to hear what another person is protecting and respond without being triggered. Through therapy examples, Schwartz shows how couples and individuals shift dramatically when even one person accesses self. Tension softens, conversations slow down, and solutions emerge naturally. Importantly, self-leadership does not mean passivity. The self can say no, set limits, and take decisive action, without hostility or fear. This chapter reframes strength as calm clarity rather than control. Schwartz also shows how self-leadership internally mirrors external leadership. As inner systems become harmonious, external relationships reflect that harmony. Chapter 8. Vision and Purpose. Chapter 8 explores how purpose emerges once parts are no longer burdened. Many people believe purpose comes from ambition or external success. Schwartz argues that true purpose arises from alignment with self. When protective parts are no longer consumed by fear, they free energy that can be used creatively and relationally. People often discover renewed interest in service, creativity, and connection. Schwartz introduces the idea that purpose is not something you invent. It is something you uncover. It emerges naturally as inner conflict decreases. The chapter includes exercises designed to help people prepare for emotional crises and to develop compassion towards suffering, both personal and collective. Purpose, in IFS, is deeply connected to compassion. Part 3. Self in the Body, Self in the World. Chapter 9. Life Lessons and TOR-MENTORS. In this chapter, Schwartz reframes difficult people and painful situations as tormentors, teachers that torment us into growth. These experiences activate unhealed parts and expose where healing is still needed. Rather than avoiding triggers, IFS invites curiosity about them. When a situation causes an intense reaction, it is a signal that a part has been activated. Schwartz explains how repeated patterns in relationships often stem from the same wounded parts being triggered again and again. Until those parts are healed, the pattern persists. Advanced parts mapping techniques help identify which parts are involved during triggering moments. This transforms everyday life into an ongoing healing practice. Chapter 10. The Laws of Inner Physics. Chapter 10 outlines predictable principles that govern inner systems. Schwartz calls these the laws of inner physics. One key law is that force creates resistance. Attempts to suppress or eliminate parts always backfire. Another law is that compassion reorganizes systems. When parts feel seen and respected, they naturally soften. Energy follows attention. What we fight becomes stronger. What we listen to transforms. Schwartz uses clinical examples to show that these laws operate consistently across individuals and cultures. Understanding them allows healing to proceed more efficiently and safely. Chapter 11. Embodiment. The final chapter in this section emphasizes that healing is not purely mental. Parts live in the body as sensations, tensions, and impulses. Trauma is often stored somatically. Intellectual insight alone cannot release it. Embodiment practices allow parts to experience safety in the present moment. Schwartz describes how self-energy can be felt physically as warmth, openness, or grounding. When parts sense this embodied presence, they relax. The chapter includes body-focused exercises and therapy examples showing how physical awareness completes the healing process. Healing becomes not just something you understand, but something you feel. By integrating self, parts, and body, IFS restores wholeness at every level. Schwartz concludes by returning to the book's central message: people are inherently good. Violence, addiction, and cruelty are not proof of evil, but of wounded parts carrying unbearable burdens. IFS offers a path toward individual and collective healing by replacing judgment with understanding. When we lead ourselves from self, compassion spreads outward. The way we treat our parts becomes the way we treat the world. The final invitation is simple but profound. Listen inside. Nothing within you needs to be destroyed. Everything within you wants to heal.